Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start our webinar by taking a moment to do the land acknowledgement. That is a critical part of how we at Tamarack like to open all our events. So just take a breath, and I invite you to join me in acknowledging that we are all meeting on Indigenous land. For those of us who are settlers, I also want to take a moment to appreciate and express our gratitude to the generations of Indigenous peoples who have cared for the land that we now call home. For us at Tamarack, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples is something that we believe must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in all our communities. I personally am joining you today from Caledon, Ontario, which is the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, and also home to Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Métis peoples. If you know the land, the Indigenous land on which you yourself are from, just take a moment and I invite you to type that into the chat box so we can have a bit of a sense of where we're all coming from and the Indigenous elders who have preceded us. And then I would like to, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Karen Gingras from the Edmonton Community Development Company. Karen has recently accepted an appointment as the Interim Executive Director of the Edmonton Community Development Company. And she's been working there since 2018 alongside the previous Executive Director and the Director of Neighbourhood Development. She brings to her work more than 20 years of passionate involvement in community economic development that has taken her across the province of Alberta, which is where she calls home. Karen has prior experience working as an executive director in nonprofit organizations such as Vibrant Communities Edmonton, where she led the creation of Make Tax Time Pay and furthered financial literacy programs throughout various collaborations. She has a wide range of experience as a business coach, a lender, and a role of manager of planning and development at a northern municipality. And she brings all of this wisdom and knowledge to her current role. Welcome, Karen. So glad you're here.
I am thrilled to be sharing our stories.
I can't wait to hear more. So before we dive in, the other thing we wanted to do is ask those of you on the line if you could take a moment and be part of a poll. And this poll, which invites you to choose however many options you feel you apply, is about getting a sense of the extent to which problem properties are an issue within your field of work and or your community. So let us see what the range of interest and knowledge about problem properties are in the world where you live. Oh, we're creeping up on 60%, so let's give us a little bit more time just to see if we can get a few more responses in there. Can we hit 70% even? Oh, we're getting close. Yay. Okay, keep going. Give it a couple more seconds because we crossed the 70% threshold. All right, Connor, how about you display for us what results we landed with? Beautiful, take a look. So majority of people are aware, and which is 33%, 18%, 24% of you recognize that the issue of problem properties does affect your work and you're considering whether that should be part of your mandate, and 18% of you are actively involved in addressing this issue in your communities. So I'd invite you all to share your questions throughout this webinar as they come up, because we are allocating lots of time to explore and respond to those questions. And also those of you who are doing this kind of work as well, we welcome you to share your wisdom and knowledge from your own experience as well. All right, so Karen, we are really curious to begin our conversation with you by having a bit of an understanding first and foremost about the Edmonton Community Development Company and how you guys landed in on rehabilitating problem properties as a key strategy of your work.
Well, the Edmonton Community Development Company was established in late 2017, and in 2018, our first executive director, Mark Holmgren, joined the organization, and from there, the mission and vision was established, and the organization has evolved really out of End Poverty Edmonton, and it was there was a business case presented to Edmonton City Council, and with their approval, some funds were allocated to the creation and ongoing operations of the organization. And in 2018, when I joined, how that essentially led the way to our P10 Project 10 efforts in problem property resolutions began. And so I'd joined, started driving around, walking around, riding my bike around the neighborhoods, and saw that in the middle of a neighborhood block, there'd be a really derelict property surrounded by lovely homes and with lovely yards. And so I started creating a database of these properties. And so that was the essence of the beginning of our project. What I thought I would do is share the mission and the vision of ECDC, if I still have control. There we go, of the screen. So our mission is to engage and collaborate with urban core neighborhoods and to understand their needs and aspirations, and to build community capacity to further their economic and social development. And I'll get into how Project 10 incorporates that community involvement in our work. And the vision, of course, neighborhood residents and stakeholders influence their community's future. And so they can actually improve their quality of life and socially, economically, and have sustainable and attractive communities. So that's what we're really seeking to do. And I thought I'd just give a quick overview of the presentation. So really to talk very briefly about what a CDC is, why problem properties is a key ECDC strategy, and to discuss what probably is what most people are interested in, the development experience with problem properties and the residential side. And also I'll do briefly a discussion around the commercial strip mall property as well that we supported the purchase of. And then I'll talk about how the neighbors are involved and what we're hoping will happen next after P10. So the scope of the CDC is quite broad, and CDCs actually evolved out of work in the US. And there are a few community development companies or corporations in Canada, with the Edmonton CDC being one of them. We're a nonprofit Part 9 company. We have 3 shareholders: the Edmonton Community Foundation, Homeward Trust, and oh no, I'm going to forget, the United Way. And so these shareholders are part of our board, and as a non-profit company, that means none of the profits held within the organization can be dispersed to the owners. It must be put back into the organization's work. And while at this point in time, we aren't actually making profit, we do anticipate doing that with the work we're doing in P10. So that's why it's relevant. So for us, with our very broad scope of service, what we're trying to do right now is focus on residential and commercial development and neighborhood engagement. We have some smaller projects with market research and the development and support of social enterprises. But for now, with our resources as they are, we're focusing on development and creating change through that development. So the question of why did you pick problem properties as a priority, and and where does this come from, and how is it going? So problem properties actually came from discussions within the community. So I learned from people that I know within the communities about the challenge of having neighbors that party all night and drop bags of drugs in their neighbors' backyards, among other things. And that started percolating. So that's why I took the drive around the neighborhoods, rode my bike around the neighborhoods to find out what was going on. And also in those discussions, the neighbors, the community members that we talked to, they, especially in McCauley and the Alberta Avenue district, where we're really focusing our efforts in P10 right now, they said, you know, we have the most number of supportive housing. We don't need any more supportive housing. There's a ton here. We also have the highest concentration of derelict properties. And to really understand that, I had to look at some data. And indeed, they certainly do have the highest proportion of derelict properties. And you'll see in a map what this actually looks like later on in the presentation. And these neighborhoods have also experienced many families leaving. So even though the city as a whole has grown, most neighborhoods have grown in population, these have experienced exodus, and that resulted in school closure. That resulted in an entrenchment of homes that are not being redeveloped and not being and disinvestment really coming along into the neighborhoods. And so as a CDC, this is right up our alleys to address, you know, that disinvestment. So the two really worked hand in hand for us, which is why we chose to concentrate on it.
Beautiful.
So as you can see in this map, and I'll tell you how we got to this place, there's a high concentration, and these are actual pins on a map that we've created to show McCauley in the yellow, and Alberta Avenue in the darker orange, Eastwood in the lighter orange, Parkdale in the blue. So right now in our database, we have 190 problem properties, derelict properties in the urban core. That grew from, you know, a handful in 2018 that we're aware of, and more communities actually, people within the neighborhood started calling us. We started following the AHS, Alberta Health Services, health orders, where they close down some properties, or as many as they can with their resources. And we found out about a certain online platform called EpiCollect. And with EpiCollect, we were able to map every single property that we found. And within each pin, we're able to also find out all of the background data we've learned about particular properties. And we've started to see some patterns. We've started to see certain numbered companies show up time and again in titles, land titles that we've pulled for the properties. We've started to see names come up time and again for on the land titles that we pulled up. We've found certain properties have repeating news stories. Some are called murder houses for a reason. So we were able to map every single property that we have found in our database. And whenever you click on a pin, it tells you everything we know about that property. And so this has become the foundation for what properties are we going to actually purchase. And it's been absolutely crucial for us to be able to understand the scope and the magnitude of problem properties, but also inform our work as we move along.
Beautiful.
So living near a problem property really is a 24/7 experience. And this picture is is it's the backyard of one of the problem properties we purchased. And so part of the work we've done is we've had a contractor connect with neighbors of problem properties, so we can start to document their experience, document what they're living through. And in a conversation with someone named Maria, she was questioned when she went to get a mortgage. Why would you choose to live in this neighborhood? You know, it's like as if it was her poor judgment that was the root of her problem, and not the neighboring landlord's problem, which is really sad when you think about it. Oops, let's go back. Oh dear. We don't need subtitles. There we go. And we don't need that one. So when the interview ended, Maria said she's done with the community. She really experienced threatening behaviors, break-ins. Some neighbors have actually had people try to set their homes on fire. So she asked the question, how much am I willing to sweat for this community for so little return? And she's decided to sell her house and leave. Of course, sometimes selling your home and recouping your equity is really challenging when you have a derelict property, a problem property right next to you. So when we first started thinking about what we were going to buy, there was and is, as I said, a pattern of ownership, and we'd been advised to be careful about the work we're doing around these properties. And I know that when I drove around one day in McCauley, I was actually followed by someone. And that, was pretty scary. And so initially we thought, okay, we're just going to put, our colors up on the fences that we put around the properties we buy, and a number. And so people can call us, and we can sort of scope out who's calling us and share information so that we can keep our staff safe. And so instead of putting up our logo on our website and everything, we put up our general number with the number 1, to create some sense of curiosity as well. And I did receive a phone call, and I was pretty naive. And someone said, I hear you now own this property, and there's some of my stuff in there and I want to get it out. Can you tell me who you are and what's your number? And they went on, and I got sucked right in. And, the person was definitely not someone with stuff in the property. It was probably someone calling on the behalf of the prior owner. So the story of number 1, we purchased a property that was in foreclosure, and I wasn't involved in that purchase decision at the time. I got more involved after number 2, property number 2. And so the property is in foreclosure. The realtor working with our ED said, hey, this is a great buy. You're looking for properties that you can either tear down or renovate. This is it, and it's going for cheap. Let's put an offer in. Well, when it's in foreclosure and the Court of Queen's Bench is the one looking after the sale, you buy sight unseen. So that's what we did. And we knew that we'd have to follow certain processes to be able to get a development permit and a building permit. And so we contracted a hazmat assessment company to go in and, determine, is there some asbestos or lead in the property? And as it turns out, that was the least of our worries. So I went in because I was curious. I hadn't been, in the building. I was standing on the stairways going into the house, and I had backpack and I had a crowbar. It's kind of unusual for a house. And I had someone yell out their window as they drove by, hey, should I be calling the cops? I said, no, I own this place. It's okay. I didn't want to get into the whole explanation of, who we are, what we're doing. And so this is number one. We had to pry the plywood off the door. And as you can see, it's 3 stories. So when I went in with the hazmat guy, we, went into each of the rooms, pried the plywood off the doors, made our way upstairs, stepped into this room at the very top of the building, looked to the left first. Well, that's kind of interesting. There's a knife there. There's some sort of, slicer. What's going on? We turned to our right, and this is what we saw. We saw drug paraphernalia, which, this is the first time I'd ever seen this. Again, pretty naive, sort of like out of a movie, a bunch of white powder. And we didn't know what the powder was. And we also understand the, the dangers of things like fentanyl. So we backed right out. And so this was part of the hazmat. We couldn't actually do anything more until we had the drug identified and removed. And so, calling around, who the heck does drug removal? And so I finally found a company and contracted them to go in with their high-powered equipment to determine what kind of drug this was so that we could safely remove it. And as we're leaving the room, because his equipment couldn't determine what was the drug, which was kind of scary, we spotted a plastic jug wrapped in duct tape, and he just went, uh-oh, let's get blah, blah, blah out of here. And when we got out, he said, that is actually a jug of chemicals used in a meth lab to create meth. And it's highly volatile. We may have to evacuate the whole neighborhood because it could explode. And so that was my introduction to problem properties. Thankfully, he was an ex-Edmonton police officer, started his own company, called up the drug unit who goes around and detects what the drugs are. And so they came, and they have even better equipment. They were able to identify it was meth, not fentanyl. And the reason it couldn't be identified by our contractors' equipment was because it'd been really cut a lot with ephedrine. So they were able to remove that. They were able to remove the jug. And then we were able to get all the junk removed. That in itself was also quite an ordeal. We had to make sure that our team that was doing this was conscious and aware of the risk of needles and biological waste because there weren't operating bathrooms in the building, and to be just super, super careful in the cleanup of the building as well as the yard. And so we had contracted a local social enterprise, and they were familiar with that undertaking, which is crucial. So they took it seriously, and we were able to move on and get it demolished. And so this is an example of the complexity of working in the core neighborhoods, because instead of just looking for hazmat as in asbestos and lead, we end up having to consider biological waste, drugs, syringes, all of the things that up the cost of the work we do that you won't find when you're going into some older neighborhoods that don't have as many derelict properties. They don't have the same amount of disinvestment in their neighborhoods. And so as we learned and our experience grew, many people started asking us, would you buy our property? And realtors would start asking us, will you buy this property? Will you buy this property? And so we were flooded with opportunities, and with a limited amount of resources, financial resources, we said, okay, we've got to decide what are the priorities here. What should we be looking at? And so we started with a matrix, which is really this decision tree. And originally, I think we only had 4 questions. And then as our experience grew, we realized, as an example, zoning was absolutely crucial, because the first 2 properties we bought were not zoned for front to back duplexes. They were zoned for the minimum of 3 independent units. Well, lots in the core neighborhoods are often substandard. And what that means is they're smaller than the standard lot that you would find in an urban environment. And that then impacts what you can build. And so to build a 3-unit independent living unit on a substandard lot, that took a fair bit of ingenuity. And so we learned along the way, prioritize the type of zoning, make sure that we aren't buying a property in a zone that is going to create a bunch of problems for us. Then we considered some properties and then found out, oh my goodness, they're on the historical resources list, and to be able to tear them down because they were not renovatable, you'd have to get permission of council. So we learned, let's make sure that they're not on the list or the release has already been received by the seller. Again,
Karen, this
yes.
is fabulous. Will you be able, I'm hoping we'll be able to share this decision tree with?
Oh, absolutely. You bet. You bet.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
I think this is great. And so I'm also curious because I know your project 10 commits you, right, to hopefully redeveloping 10 residential properties within what time span have you set for yourself?
Well, originally the time span was over 3 years. Then it got shrunk to a year. So that was a year of purchasing 10 properties. We're currently at 7. We have 3 more to go. So I think we'll be able to achieve that within that 12-month time frame. And then we are hoping to have shovels in the ground on a couple of the properties this year. And
Beautiful.
I can get into why it takes so long to do that.
You know, part of what I've loved, even from the one example, is, as you said, really highlighting the complexity, also the different areas of knowledge that have to be pulled together to do this kind of assessment.
Yes.
And I know one of the other stories I was really impressed about in terms of the work of the Edmonton CDC was you haven't limited yourself to residential properties. You've also found yourself stepping into the rehabilitation of commercial properties as well.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? And
sure.
Curious to know kind of how is it different, right? From the like, is it a totally different learning curve? Is some of the stuff you've learned in residential equally applicable to commercial? All of that kind of stuff.
Sure. So I'll get into that. I just also wanted to make sure people understood that in older neighborhoods, the infrastructure, the sewer lines, the water lines are also old. So when you tear down something and you want to build front to back duplex or some condos, the capacity for the water flow so that if there's an emergency and fire has to come is typically not there. And that can also trigger some very huge expenses in your design and possibly even in what you have to put into the ground. So we're all now at number 7, as I mentioned. We're considering number 8, which was a historical resource property. And I still have to do the pro forma. We really work hard on that. This is one of the properties that we purchased. This is the last property. We're going to put a 4-plex on it. And this is an example of the basement. Now, sometimes landowners are not as upfront as you'd like them to be. So we sent our hazmat assessment team in and we were unaware that a fire had been there and the floors were actually unstable. And thankfully no one was hurt. Then we had to go back to the guy and say, we're not going to do anything further on this until you get the asbestos taken care of, because you have to incur the cost of stabilizing the floor. So that's another example of complexity. So moving on, this is the before picture, and really the now picture of the strip mall that was purchased by the McCauley Development Cooperative. And so again, when I was started with ECDC and had conversations in coffee shops with folks in the community, finding out about what's going on and what could we possibly do to make a change. Many people said, when I asked the question, what's the one thing, if you had your druthers, the one thing that got taken care of, that changed, what would it be? And time again, it was this strip mall. Can you do something about this strip mall? Because this is a place where drugs are sold right out in the open. This is a place where all sorts of things are going on in the back alley, in the alcoves. This is a gathering place of all sorts of people that are causing social disorder in our community. And this is causing us a lot of stress and a lot of fear. And so this strip mall is right beside this beautiful park, lovely, lovely park. And yet, you know, it was causing so much grief. And some of the people I talked to said, we tried to talk to the owners to try to buy it. And what they were asking was just, it was an insane price. And so one of the people that I work with on contract, she said, well, what about an investment co-op? You know, is this a possibility? And so we used the grapevine in the community and essentially called on one person and said, who should we invite to the table to talk about this? We think there might be a way for us to buy this, us as in the collective neighborhood, to buy this mall. And so from there, we had about 20 people come to the first meeting, and ultimately about 10 stayed as our leadership team. And as we learned more and more about a co-op, we got closer and closer to actually deciding, you know, maybe we could do this. So the Edmonton CDC essentially seconded me to the co-op development and the financial aspect of it. And with the help of some consultants, we learned about what an investment co-op is. And with the help of I call him a unicorn realtor, he was able to charm his way by driving to Calgary where the owners were, and on a number of times to break the ice and try to get them to sell this to us. Because originally they told him in no uncertain terms and not politely to get lost. And so he was not going to give it up. And we were glad he didn't, because he was able to get them to come to the table for and give us the opportunity to make an offer. And so we really didn't want to have a time crunch, but in the world of business, you got to do the deal. And so you know, our realtor said, there's no way in ever this guy's going to give you 6 months you can raise the money. You got 6 weeks. And there was a collective gasp, because that 6 weeks meant we had to get from incorporating the co-op to raising $1.1 million and securing financing for the balance. And it really was something. So this is quite different than the residential. The residential, you know, it's a much smaller amount of money. It's a totally different type of due diligence that's required, because we're not tearing this down. And rather, we are hoping to get it changed into something quite beautiful and a gathering place for families that we hope start moving in from the all the homes that we're building into the community. And so the co-op had got incorporated in September of 2019, and within 6 weeks, through no more than 2 degrees of separation, 2 degrees of circles of influence, we were able to find 91 members who invested $1.1 million. And we were also able to obtain a loan from the Social Enterprise Fund, because no financial institution would touch us. It was just way too high risk. to purchase this mall. And so it was done. It was it was 7 days a week of Karen running around and trying to make the purchase, getting investors and helping our board do their sales pitch. And we were thrilled that we were able to buy it. And so
remind me, Karen, how much of that 1.1 million invested in the co-op came from residents of the neighborhood, which is really, just for those of you who don't know Edmonton, my understanding is was not a well-to-do neighborhood generally, right?
Generally, incomes are lower in this neighborhood, and the majority of the investment came from this neighborhood. Now, the upside is many people have RSPs and some have TFSAs. And so through the investment co-op model, we were able to have people open self-directed RSPs and self-directed TFSAs and transfer money into that. That money's all managed, administered through the Canadian Worker Federation Co-op. And yeah, that's really where the majority, well, it was almost split 50-50. So the majority of the 51%, I think it was, came from RSPs and TFSAs, and the balance was cash. So
incredible.
So
for
there's money.
For our members who are not necessarily Canadian, what TFSAs and RSPs are retirement vehicles. Like in the US, it would be equivalent to 401ks maybe.
Yeah.
So I know I want to make sure that we have lots of time for participant questions. So this is my plug to all of you on the line. If you have questions that are bubbling and or comments, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. But if I can, I think you really kind of captured for me the power of harnessing community. You really sort of shifted also with this notion of an investment co-op, this sense that even in less well-to-do neighborhoods, there's an energy and a commitment and a passion that can be mobilized so that residents do become investors in these properties.
Yeah.
So I know one question I would have is if you have any resources to share and or knowledge or frameworks around how you've structured your investment co-op that are shareable, I think that might be something that would be a lovely kind of resource to share. Sure. But as we're waiting for folks to chime in with questions, what's your hope for the future of your work around rehabbing properties in Edmonton?
Well, as you can see, this is a picture of our hope for the piazza, and that will take some additional financing and loans, but that's the hope, that it becomes spectacular. And our hope is that in the immediate, that we're able to pre-sell, hopefully, the homes that we're building, and to go on to P20, and perhaps in P20 or P30, we start to gather investors to address some of the larger scale, block long properties that are derelict, because that would take millions of dollars. And we certainly do have in our database literally blocks of derelict properties. And so they're often owned by the same person or company, and they are not listed. So we're hoping that we can get sufficient money to make an offer to actually purchase those properties. Now, that would mean displacing a lot of people. And so we're hoping that if we're ever able to raise that kind of cash and to purchase those homes, that we can actually build really nice supportive housing instead of crappy derelict properties that are unsafe to live in. And so that people aren't going to be displaced along the routes, the blocks where they're used to living. So that's part of that vision of what we hope we can do in the future.
Fantastic. Part of what I'm really loving is that incremental notion. So you say project 10, in so many years, we've got the short-term goal of rehabbing 10 residential properties. Now we've got that, we've got the knowledge. Now we're moving to 20. Now we're moving to 30. Fantastic. Well, Karen, I just, on behalf of all of us, really want to reach out and thank you again. I think what I'm leaving with is a real appreciation for, conceptually what seems like a really great idea, and the depth of kind of research and foundation building that needs to happen, and also the wealth of knowledge across so many different domains to be able to translate this vision into reality. So I really want to applaud you and your colleagues at Edmonton CDC for taking this on. And I would love to have you continue to share any resources, thoughts, ideas to help make it easier for other communities to follow in your footsteps. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So appreciate this.